You're listening to the Millionacres Podcast. Our mission at Millionacres is to educate and empower investors to make great decisions and achieve real estate investing success. We provide regular content and perspective for everyone, from those just starting out to seasoned pros with decades of experience. At Millionacres, we work every day to help you demystify real estate investing.
Hello, I'm Deidre Woolard, an editor at Millionacres, and thank you so much for tuning into the Millionacres Podcast. The short-term rental market has just been fascinating to watch in the past year. The pandemic brought it down for a while, but if you're a short-term rental operator, you've probably watched your bookings go back up, first in sort of resorty areas and now back in the cities. To talk about this wild ride and more in hospitality is Mike Liverton. He's the founder of Jetstream Hospitality Solutions. Welcome.
Thank you, Deirdre. It's great to be with you.
So what led you to the world of hospitality tech? This is sort of an interesting place to be.
As with many things, it wasn't planned. I do come from an engineering and technology stroke e-commerce background. And I've always loved using technology to provide the best possible customer experience. So I think I'm inherently a host type person. So my first business was e-commerce. I was selling cell phones on pay monthly contracts back in 2000. We survived the dot-com crash, and I had a successful exit in 2006. I then moved to Canada and invested in properties in apartment hotels. Apartment hotels, condominium hotels were all the rage back there just before the 2008 financial crisis. And obviously at the time I was attracted by rental guarantees. There was not going to need to be any work on my part in terms of creating rental revenues. Anyway, 2008 financial crisis appeared and no rental guarantees materialized. So I therefore started renting my own properties, which were all short-term zoned, on VRBO, which really at the time was about the only real short-term rental marketplace, HomeAway VRBO, as it was called at the time. This went well. I've always been a natural host, so really focused on the hospitality detail and giving the guests the very best experience. So I had lots of bookings, which raised the interest of the actual hotel operator. Being the consummate businessman, I then negotiated wholesale pricing to have access to the rest of their inventory. So suddenly, instead of my own 8 units, I had access to over 200 units. And I started filling their units up very quickly too, again, just with the same adverts on VRBO. But then what happened was that they wanted to feed in dynamic pricing. So essentially, similar to airlines, when you get certain occupancy thresholds, they want the prices to go up. And there was no technology in the marketplace to take that dynamic pricing from their, hotel distribution channel manager and feed that into the short-term rental marketplaces. So in 2012, I decided to build the technology to provide the solution to that problem. And there basically was the birth of Jetstream Hospitality Solutions. So that went well, and we integrated into VRBO, HomeAway, and then during that time, obviously Airbnb had come onto the scene and had grown significantly. In 2017, they approached us because we had a lot of inventory, actually in Banff, in the Rockies in Canada, and all of that needed dynamic pricing integration, which obviously we had. So Airbnb approached us and said, could we integrate and build into their platform to feed that inventory into their distribution database? So we basically became a technology integration partner with Airbnb back in 2017 and became the first company with a multi-unit representative level API integration with Airbnb. It just basically means we could feed in property listings that had more than one similar unit. So if there was a hotel with 51 bedroom, 52 bedroom, and 100 studios, etc., we could feed in those 3 different listing types, but we could take bookings for all of those representative units whilst they were available. So that's how I got into the hospitality sector, solving a problem with technology.
Well, that's fascinating. Wow. So you kind of got ahead of dynamic pricing before Uber and everybody else kind of started thinking about that. So that's really, really interesting. And working with Airbnb, so that was back before they really had a relatively sophisticated platform at that point, right? It was still relatively early days on that.
Well, that's right. At the time, they had their single key level API, and we actually sort of, I guess, integrated into that and actually created shadow listings that would only display when the first listing was booked, etc. So it was a bit of a hack, but they liked the innovative thought process behind how we were solving that problem for them. And then about a year or two later, they actually came up with their full um, hospitality API for representative partners. And obviously we built to that and helped them develop that.
I love also that you mentioned condo hotels. I remember covering that, the rise of those in, before the great financial crisis. I'm starting to see them come back. Have you noticed that too, that there's developments now are sort of even using the terminology, like when they used to talk about like hotels and things like that?
Well, yes, because of the short-term rental marketplace and Airbnb, they've suddenly come back into fashion in a very big way. And what drove that essentially was when the legislation and all the policy changes came out, which restricted people listing residential units as short-term rental. So the only units essentially that had legal zoning to be on Airbnb were these more commercial hotel type developments. And that's really where we've grown our business, I guess, both globally, is working with these large operators of these condominium and apartment hotel buildings.
Interesting. So in the past 5 years, since Jetstream, kind of evolved, you've probably seen a lot of changes. What are you seeing now? Is it the rise of the condos, the hotels coming back? Is it longer stays? That's something else we're seeing. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've never really been in the hotel room market, but there's no doubt that we've seen a lot of different types of guests, and the common theme is that travelers now are looking generally to stay in properties with more space and more amenities. Namely, they want a kitchen, they want a larger living area, and I think a lot of this has been borne by Airbnb showing that there's alternative ways to stay other than using hotels. And I think they've had a two-sided trust platform, which has been incredibly successful. And I think it's introduced traveling to a lot of people that thought maybe traveling was out of their budget as well. So I think it's democratized the whole travel sector, and it's given a lot more, I think, confidence for people that didn't have a hospitality background, that have a spare suite or spare room to get into hospitality too. So I think things have matured tremendously, and obviously, with the pandemic and people really being forced to stay inside longer, where people did need to travel, they've generally opted for a home/apartment type property versus a hotel room.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they want to be able to cook, or they want to be able to have the family all together. There's so many reasons for that. We saw family reunions were sort of the start of the return of short-term rentals. So I want to talk about something that I saw on the Jetstream website, which I love that you use this term guest delight. I think that's so wonderful. And you already talked about being a great host. So how did you learn to become a good host?
I think it's just inherent in me, whether that's with teams that I build in business, or people that I want to share knowledge with, or people that I like to create an experience with. I always used to create house parties and have jazz bands in, etc. I just love creating something that people would remember for all the right reasons, and not just something that met with their expectations. I've always wanted to, I guess, make things better than what people expect them to be, whether that's a process, whether that's an experience, or whether that's a stay. So I can't remember the first time it came up or where it came from. All I know is that guest delight is something that instills so much more passion for what we do than delivering guest satisfaction.
Interesting. Yeah, because satisfaction is like, Yeah, all right, that wasn't too bad. Delight is 5 stars. Delight is wow.
Delight generally stays with you for the rest of your life. It's a memorable experience, and that's what we strive and we're passionate about delivering.
So, we also want to talk about Jetstream's that you have this idea of 24/7 multilingual guest communication. I think that's so smart. What are you thinking about multilingual listings? How many languages does it vary? But I mean, it must vary by country to some extent. But it seems to me that that's a trend that not everyone is in on yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think coming from England and then going to Canada and starting the business in Canada and then pushing the business down into the States, the natural next landing ground was to come back over the pond to my roots and push into Europe, and obviously with that comes a lot of different things. I mean, thankfully it's one currency throughout Europe, but obviously the language is very different. And it was definitely, again, going back to the guest delight and making people feel comfortable, and trusting us as a business. It's very important that if we're marketing a listing in France, and there's a lot of domestic travel in France, for example, that listing is written in French as well as English. It's the English content that's used to power other translations, but from a local domestic listing perspective, we write them in French. So it was a natural, I guess, desire, the natural progression for us to want to achieve that when the technology allowed us to be able to deliver that. And again, when the marketplaces allowed us to deliver that, because some of the marketplaces would just have one primary language, and then it would translate it on the marketplace from that primary language. It wouldn't allow to have multiple different languages to ensure that if there was any local, I guess, correct grammar, that we could reflect that in writing it correctly rather than relying on Google Translate.
Yeah, I've kind of wanted to ask about that. So, are they all hand translated, or are you using AI, or how is it done?
Well, where we can, I mean, for example, the French listings are written in French and we have English as well. And so the English powers the translation, and the French obviously is as we've entered it. So, but the AI, I mean, obviously the capabilities of AI-driven translation is just increasing incredibly year on year, month on month. So I mean, the quality of the translation now is way better than what it was when we first went into Europe 4 years ago. So as we grow, we're always assessing based on the quality of the translation and the different languages, which ones we need to write at a local level, and which ones will rely on AI-driven Google translation.
That makes sense. So obviously you're operating across multiple countries. How are trends differing right now in terms of the return of short-term rentals?
Well, it's been a fascinating 18 months, that's for sure. And there's no doubt that the different the dynamics that play out at different times over the last year and a half has impacted tremendously. Travel trends, confidence of people booking, and also the time window between them booking and obviously staying. But one thing that has shone through is really the trend of more people working from home, and people being more empowered to work remotely, and therefore their ongoing understanding that they can actually use this to their advantage and their family's advantage by going on vacation more frequently, or when they go on vacation, they go for longer because they can work remotely. And it's interesting because we've done some surveys recently with our guests, because we didn't know whether everybody's going to stop remote working and go back to the office. And, we basically asked our previous guests what was the possibility of them staying if they do work remotely. Were they considering continuing to work remotely? And 81% of them said that yes, they're essentially adopting remote working, home working, and they see it having a big impact in terms of improving their work life and their home life, and the way in which they do travel. and that they envisage traveling more and traveling longer. So I think as we come out of this pandemic, not only do we see people wanting to go back on holiday and preferring short-term rentals over hotels, but we also see that people will want to actually work, live, and stay longer. So that's going to create even more demand in the short-term rental sector. We saw that, we definitely saw that as a much stronger trend in the US, but more recently we've seen it in the UK and in Europe, and certainly Canada is definitely going to, receive a lot of that demand, because Canada's very much a destination where people go to spend time outdoors as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because we've been talking a lot about that flexible living thing. I just saw another company today that raised money for another sort of like flexible living rentals. It's interesting to watch because I'm not really sure if it is going to be a long-term trend or a short-term trend. Certainly something that we've been following. Do you look at it from this is what's happening now? Are you looking at it as something that's going to have, really be something for the next few years? What are you thinking right now?
Yes, without a doubt. As we come out of the pandemic and the demand for short-term rental properties continues to increase, we're seeing a lot more confidence with both investors and developers actively targeting this new market opportunity and revenue stream. They're starting to acquire, repurpose, or build assets to address these higher revenue opportunities, and therefore introduce short-term rental assets into their overall property portfolio. What is important to recognize here is that the short-term rental space and long-term rental market are starting to blend. There's a new industry term called flex rentals. Essentially, a building can be operated to address both short-term rentals. Traditionally, that would have been up to, say, 30 days, as well as longer-term flex rentals, which could range anywhere from between 1 to 12 months, again, for this new emerging trend of people that are traveling, living, and working remotely.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know that at one point Airbnb tried to get into that space and was trying to develop buildings where people could have apartments and then put their apartments into the pool, which reminds me of the condo hotels back in the early 2000s. So real estate is so cyclical. All right, let's take a quick break here.
Like what you're hearing? Get more real estate investing news and advice from Millionacres on Instagram at Millionacres and on Twitter at Millionacres_co.
Some of our listeners are undoubtedly among the fortunate group sitting on piles of valuable tech stock. If you're one of them, listen up. Urban Catalyst could help you with your tax bill when it comes time to sell. Urban Catalyst is the premier qualified opportunity zone fund based in Silicon Valley. And if you meet investors' qualifications and invest in a qualified opportunity zone fund, you could potentially get big tax breaks. Here's how it works. When you go to sell your stock, you will likely generate a large capital gains tax bill, which means Uncle Sam may want to take a large chunk of it. If you're not keen on sending all that money to the U.S. Treasury, Opportunity Zone funds like Urban Catalyst can help you shield those gains. And Urban Catalyst isn't just any Opportunity Zone fund. Forbes magazine and the Sorensen Impact Center ranked Urban Catalyst one of the top 20 OZ funds in the country. Don't wait too long. If you invest before the end of this year, you may not only defer capital gains taxes, but you also may be able to reduce your capital gains by 10%. And as an added incentive, if you hold your investment for 10 years, you will likely not have to pay any federal taxes at all on those gains. And it's not just stock sales. Capital gains from real estate sales, selling your business, or even a big crypto sale, these types of capital gains can all get potentially favorable tax treatment by investing in an Opportunity Zone fund. Urban Catalyst focuses on development in downtown San Jose, an area prime for growth and revitalization. You can learn more about the fund and the numerous development projects underway by visiting urbancatalyst.com/millionacres. But keep an eye on your calendar. You only have 180 days after your capital gains event to invest in an Opportunity Zone program. So visit urbancatalyst.com/millionacres today.
I'm back with Mike Liverton of Jetstream Hospitality Solutions. We're talking about the changing world of hospitality, and we just talked about some of the changes that we're seeing, that flex rental thing that you mentioned. What does that mean for real estate investors? Because we're seeing these single-family rental portfolios for long-term rentals. What are you seeing on the short-term rental side?
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a lot of demand. We're getting a lot of interest from both property owners, property developers, and large institutional owners. I think with any investment, it's important to take a medium to long-term view. There's been a lot of different dynamics, as you were saying right at the opening of the discussion about the short-term rental market, and I think there's a lot more professionalism and stability to the short-term rental market now. When we work with a property partner, we're able to provide extensive data-based revenue forecasts, so the revenue opportunity can be understood well before the property transaction goes ahead and the property goes live. With the right property, when it's presented well, the revenues can flow very quickly. Our team follows up with every guest to get valuable feedback, to maximize reviews, and that continues to drive the momentum and maintains the listing performing optimally.
Interesting. So are you looking at how properties are performing by geography, by size? What sort of factors are you filtering in for?
Yes, I mean all of that, and as with so many things nowadays, there is so much data out there, both real data and forecast data. So we work with some of the leading data analytical companies in the industry, and they're collecting data all the time based on the location, the type of the unit, and they're comparing it with a similar sort of comp set, so you can see how it's performing. And then again, it will make recommendations based on length of stay discounts, minimum length of stay, etc. So there's a lot of different data out there, and there's some very clever software that helps drive all our revenue management recommendations.
Are you finding that people are more interested in short-term rentals right now because they're seeing the demand, or are they more worried because prices are so high and they feel like they can't get in?
They see that this is a market that is only going one way, which is, it's getting bigger, and that the opportunity to differentiate yourself within that market is still available. You can, if you're looking for a two-bedroom apartment in a particular city, you've got an incredible breadth of quality and finish and price point. And what we're seeing is people are willing to pay a higher price point. They are, some people want just obviously the convenience and functionality and price, but others are looking for more of a experiential property, or they're looking for something that's maybe better than where they live currently, and they want to try. They're treating themselves. Hospitality. When you leave home, it's all about going and experience something different. And that can be many different forms for different people. But so I think, the market's here to stay, and the revenue opportunities are significant, and certainly people, I think, are becoming more savvy, and they're becoming. They're doing the research, and there's more information available to make the right decision so that their investment is a sound one for the future.
Interesting. So I know that Jetstream advises on improvements. Do you do that for people that have already bought a property? Is it for people who are maybe thinking of buying a property? What is that service like?
We have a lot of property partners of all different sizes, and they'll come to us and say, look, they're in the market, or they have the opportunity to expand their portfolio. Are there any hotspots where demand exceeds supply? And if so, is the demand, what type of property is the demand for? Is it a two-bedroom, is it a home, etc.? And then there's obviously regulatory aspects that we can advise on, etc. So, but likewise, there's a lot of larger buildings, larger investors, multifamily home type, investors that are looking to acquire buildings, entire buildings with multiple units. And again, we can run the numbers for that. Again, based on where they want to position that property within that breadth, I guess, of finish in terms of price point. And then we can also, provide, recommendations and local legislation and regulations to support them on what is best to invest and find for that area.
So one of the things that Airbnb has talked about is that there's not enough hosts. And so I think that's something that we've heard other people talk about too. Are you seeing that too, where the partners that you work with are seeing a need for more properties?
Yes. And we saw that over this last year. There was quite an active little battle being played out between, Vrbo and Airbnb to see who could attract more hosts, because yes, demand has outstripped supply in many places. And we don't see that changing significantly. The regulations, legislation, etc., will continue to prohibit residential properties in many areas being turned into short-term rentals. Therefore, there's only a small amount of inventory out there that can be used for short-term rentals. And this is where the whole flex rental opportunity comes in, because some of the legislation and regulations only apply for stays of less than 30 days. But in our experience and what we're seeing, and this has been borne out by statements from Airbnb, is there's a very large percentage now, short-term rentals, which are actually for 1 month or more.
Are you finding that short-term rental property owners are looking to perhaps migrate off some of those bigger booking sites and kind of develop their own brand?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's complementary of probably what their strategy has been up until now. But it's important to realize that the large short-term rental marketplaces continue to provide a high percentage of the overall sort of booking volumes that do still flow in the industry. We recently introduced the ability to deliver full white labeled direct websites. So our partners can all have their own direct website, and that can be fully white labeled, so they can create, if they wish, their own hospitality brand. And that flows essentially all the way through to the communication with our team, all the way through to the merchant of record on the guest's credit card statement. So we're definitely appreciating that there's an opportunity to grow the amount of business that our partners can get directly through their own website, and we're empowering them to be able to seize that opportunity.
So you're an engineer, you mentioned. How do you vet new software integrations for Jetstream? Are you particularly maybe more stricter than other people because you kind of know the ins and outs of things?
Yes. I mean, we're very selective who we partner with. There's so many great companies out there. But as with all technology companies, we've only got a finite amount of technology resource within our team. So we have to be very focused on which ones we wish to partner with. And it really comes down to assessing two key areas, and they're product and team. The product must be proven leader in their field and deliver a great user experience. Likewise, the team must be equally passionate about their solution and maintaining their market leading position. So we've developed some great partnerships with some of the best-in-class companies. We integrate with our teams and their teams integrate our respective platforms, and it really does enable us to deliver some really leading edge hospitality solutions to our guests.
Fantastic. So last question for you. I know you're making the move from CEO to chairman. Just from talking to you, I get the feeling that you're probably not like sailing off into the sunset. So what are you doing now, and what does your new CEO bring to the table?
As you can probably tell, I love nourishing teams and getting people within the business and seeing them grow through the business is one of the most satisfying aspects of, starting and growing businesses. So we've always had the philosophy from promote work from within. I was very fortunate to meet Emmanuel through our mutual passion for paragliding. We actually met 11 years ago at the top of a mountain. We were each about to fly off with our paragliders, and we got talking before we launched, and therein grew a lifelong friendship, and that friendship was 6 years, at which point I invited him into the business because, like me, he's an engineer. He's very passionate about product excellence and delivering a very professional service to guests, clients. So for me, it's great timing. We've got an amazing senior management team that both Emmanuel and I have sort of grown. There's some tremendous growth opportunities and new opportunities for us to target. So I'm going to continue to be at a strategic biz dev, level, and very proud and couldn't be more happy to be using this opportunity to hand over the CEO role to Emmanuel. It's something we're both very proud of, and it's very satisfying for us both to have evolved to this stage.
Well, I think that is probably the coolest business meeting story I've ever heard. Meeting your potential CEO while paragliding. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mike. A reminder to listeners, you can learn more about Jetstream Hospitality Solutions at jetstreamtech.io. You can always email us to share your thoughts. Stay well and stay invested.
Thank you for tuning in to the Millionacres Podcast. I hope you liked today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing through your favorite podcast provider. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop us a line at help@millionacres.com. Stay well and stay invested. People on this program may have an interest in the deals, offerings, or services they discussed at Millionacres, or the Motley Fool may have a formal recommendation for or against. Always consult a certified tax professional before acting on tax advice, and do not buy or sell assets based solely on what you hear.